Hey guys, we're back with another director spotlight for Find Your Film. With this special segments we do twice a month for Find Your Film. We spotlight a filmmaker. We do a round robin rotating thing of where me, Bruce, and Eric, we each pick different filmmakers we love. Our last one was sort of a nice extended birthday present where we were able to spotlight the Master of Suspense, or the Master of Suspense Junior, Brian De Palma. That was the last one. And then before that, we spotlighted Bruce Perky, went all in on Satoshi Kon, that late amazing filmmaker. That Thank you, Bruce Perky, for bringing the world of Satoshi Kon into our purview. And now, Eric Holmes, aka Eric Mamet. By the way, if you're looking at Bruce Perky's YouTube channel, Rusto Meyer, he's the one who actually holds all our video podcasts for Find Your Film on his channel on Rusto Meyer. I'm reading off the names we've given ourselves. I've given myself the name Wag the Swarovski, and that is a nod, obviously, to Wag the Dog, the 1997 film. By the way, folks, Bruce, Eric, I actually saw Wag the Dog, directed by Barry Levinson, at a screening in New Line, Beverly Hills, back in the day. As I just continue to name drop like a you know what, I ended up really not liking that movie the first time I saw it. I just guess I was bad time, bad place for me. Obviously, that movie is quite the classic. I changed my mind on Wag the Dog after that screening. Now, we also have Glenn Perky, Bruce Perky. That's a nod to Glenn Gary, Glenn Ross. Obviously, we're not covering that as well. But, there's so many things. Bruce, is that one of your favorite Mamet things? Glenn Gary, Glenn Ross, is that an homage to one of your favorite pieces from Mamet?
I mean, it's kind of a given. Everyone sort of loves that one. It's definitely one of the better ones for sure.
Okay,
But I
yeah,
just thought it would sound good with my name thrown into it. So
that's superficial, but it's catchy, and I like it. I love it.
that's
Now,
me, super official but catchy.
but you know what Mamet is? We're going to get to Mamet's catchiness as a writer in this episode, I'm sure. And then sometimes, you do Wag the Swarovski, you do Glenn Perky, Glenn Bruce. Sometimes you really got to stick to the aesthetic of David Mamet, which is pure, simple, cuts to the bone, and clean. Eric Holmes decided to not have too much of a flourish. He just decided to go with Eric Mamet. Why not? Eric Holmes, Eric. Why not just say Eric Mamet?
I already
So,
did it, Eric Sorkin, so why not?
yes. Our last episode when we all reviewed the Trial of the Chicago 7, a movie all of us loved, especially Eric Holmes really, really loved that movie. He called himself Eric Sorkin, which was the reason why it's hard to actually pronounce is not because Eric Holmes is a very good writer. We both read his script, Bruce. Quite the writer. You agree? Can we both
I agree.
co-sign on that?
Yeah.
But I do not agree in the next week. Eric might call himself Eric Presley, Eric Washington. Eric.
I think we're gonna do a Cars retrospective, and he'll be Eric Kasich.
There you go. There you go.
Nice. Now, Eric Mamet, Eric Holmes, you only get one. I mean, we got to be very selective over the filmmakers we want to spotlight, because we basically have one choice every 6 weeks to make it. So why was David Mamet such the choice for you this week? Why was he an important person for you to spotlight?
There's a couple of reasons. One, I knew the Aaron, we'd be talking about Aaron Sorkin coming up, just because the Trial of Chicago 7 was coming up. And when you think of good writers, you think of Aaron Sorkin, you think of Quentin Tarantino, and you think of David Mamet, And one of the things I like about David Mamet, one of the things I love about David Mamet is that he's really matter of fact. As far as giving advice on writing, he's very matter of fact. It's this is just what you do. Do this, this, and this. It's not that hard. And he tries to, take the mystery out of it. And it shows in his writing and definitely his directing as well. And, sometimes that works to his advantage. Sometimes maybe not so much. But I do like the idea that, you can have a writer as great as David Mamet, and his best advice is, look, I'm just a clown, and I can do this. And I've written shit and I've written great stuff, but I've written great stuff because I've written shit in the past, and you just keep doing it and keep doing it. It's like working a muscle. Actually, Harlan Ellison kind of had that same outlook on writing. It's a job. It's a muscle you work, and the more you do it, the better you get at it. I think a lot of people they mystify writing or just art in general. They mystify it, and they're like, "Oh, the first thing I got to come out has to be a masterpiece." And a lot of times, people get paralyzed doing that. And David Mamet's one of the few people that says, "Knock it off, just write the thing. Maybe it sucks. Who cares? It sucks. Write another one. Maybe that one will be a little better. Does that one suck too? Fuck you. Keep writing. Do another one, so on and so forth." And he's just really inspiring to me. And I think people, especially like going, reading his scripts and listening to his dialogue and listening to interviews with him, you can learn a lot. And a lot of it's practical advice. It's stuff that you can actually take home with you and put into work to becoming, at the very least, a writer. Maybe not a great one, but at least you get the creative juices flowing.
Well, you want to ultimately direct your movie. You're thinking about directing. You have the plan set for it. Were you always a director first, or did you always love David Mamet when you were maybe in your 20s or your teens, or did that whole love for Mamet surface because you were you were into film, and then the writing part grew out of that?
No. The first thing I directed was called Lick the Evil, and it was
yes.
me and some friends getting drunk one weekend. It's like, fuck it, we got a camera, we don't have a script, doesn't matter, let's do this. And it turned out fun. But I mean that's I found out, same with Aaron Sorkin. I knew of David Mamet's work before I knew of David Mamet. And just, listening to interviews and stuff with him, just hearing his, I don't know if laissez-faire is the right word because I don't know what it means. Here I go using words I don't know what it means. That's how great of a writer I am.
Well, Bruce, you're the smart one. Do you know what laissez-faire means?
I have to look it up. I
think it means leave it as is. Laissez-faire.
Yeah. Okay, then I probably use it correctly, sort of. But yeah, he just had to just do the thing. And that's kind of where I started, just do the thing. And I forget what the original question was, but yeah, I don't aspire to be David Mamet, but I took a lot from him, not just in writing, but just creative endeavors in general, whether it's drawing, painting, music, whatever it is. Just the more you do it, the better you get at it. And if it turns out you like it, keep doing it. And if it turns out you don't like it and it's a headache, then quit because it's not for you.
Laissez-faire definition: a policy or attitude of letting things take their own course without interfering.
There you go. I accidentally used the word I didn't know. Right.
So that is laissez-faire. Now, Bruce, you've been Mamet guy since from the get-go. You and I we're around the same age, the 80s. So we experienced, I guess, House of Games and maybe in the early 90s, Homicide, all that, or even Speed the Plow in the plays.
I think that he's one of those guys that's always kind of snuck through. And I've mentioned this time and again, but one of those people where you encounter his work but don't necessarily know that it was his work until either after the fact. I mean, some things you hear about it, like I feel like Glenn Ross was probably the first one where it really hit me that was the same guy. But I know I had seen House of Games when it came out because I used to love Siskel and Ebert, and they really championed that movie when it came out. But I don't think I connected the person. And then later on, I think I read Oleana, and from then on, there's been a bunch of things that have come across. In and out throughout my life, there's been a Mamet here and a Mamet there, here, there, Mamet everywhere, So yeah, and that's it kind of goes to Eric's point, is that he's kind of he's a workman, and he the attitude of art is for everybody, and he just keeps producing art, and it isn't always him directing. It's sometimes him writing or directing, or it's a play, or it's a movie, or it's a TV episode. So he just kind of does the work, I guess, is what I would say.
and I did a little Eric Mamet. I did a little research for this podcast. I did a little bit, a smidge, just a smidge. On one of my morning walks, I listened to this podcast called Kick-Ass News Podcast, and it was a one-on-one with David Mamet for about 35 minutes. And they asked him a question. The interviewer asked Mamet a question about him being such a prolific writer and artist, and he was basically gushing over David Mamet. Like, probably if any of us interviewed him, we'd probably be saying gushing as well at his.
I would not. I know he'd yell at me if I did that.
Well, you would not, because you actually took his last name, Eric. So there's a lack of humble modesty in the. Just kidding, but yeah. So then you probably come off with the best interview because I'd be gushing a lot. But when the interview asked him, how did you what's the key to that? You're amazing and doing all this stuff, and he said, well, my kids wouldn't think the same way, because when we had that house in Vermont, he had a cabin, right, like a little shed or cabin near his house that he would go to every morning to write. So most of us would say, if we don't know Mamet, he's not a family member, he'd say, oh, there's David Mamet going in at early in the morning to do 8 to 10 hours a day of work. What an amazing guy. But his kids, they always said whenever he went to the cabin, they used to basically just call him, oh, well, it's now dad's going there to he's gonna nap. He's just gonna nap. So we think of him as this prodigious writer, but you know what, Eric, like you were saying, it's just about doing the work. It's a day-to-day basis, and sometimes there's work. A lot of times there's napping involved, even with David Mamet. And ultimately, if you stick with it, like you're doing a lot of things, the writers group, and you're actually encouraging us to write as well, is ultimately you're going to just by default, if you put in work every day, you're going to come up with a big volume of work no matter what. So I find that to be really interesting about Mamet. Now, this episode, we're not just going to be talking about Mamet as a writer. Eric instructed me and Bruce that we want to focus in on David Mamet as a writer and a director. My first thing to you, Eric, do you consider David Mamet to be a grade A director? That's my first point of question to you.
Well, I don't know. I guess that's it. That's the easy question. He's definitely, like, what I like about his writing is that there's not too much flourish in it. There's a little bit of writerly stuff here and there, but for the most part, he writes the stutters and the pauses and the stammers and so on and so forth of the characters. I feel like I'm reading one of his scripts right now because I'm doing quite a bit of that myself. But his dialogue out realistic, almost to a fault, because he writes all that. He has a good sense of how people sound when they talk. And I think a lot of that is just matter of fact, like, well, this is how people talk, so that's how I'm going to write it. If they say something, this is how they're going to say it, so that's how I'm going to write it down. And I think he has a very matter of fact kind of take on his directing. And again, I don't have an answer for it just yet, and I'm hoping that's kind of what we can talk about. I get the sense that if someone else takes the scripts, they might be able to breathe a little more life in it than he's willing to put in as far as being a director. Does that make sense?
Makes sense.
Because it's like you have House of Games, which is a really good movie. And it's just kind of, this is what they're saying. Say the words. The camera's going to sit here and you're going to say the words. Okay, you said the words. Now we're going to move the camera here. Okay, say the words. So on and so forth. And it's really clinical, I guess. And there's not, back to Aaron Sorkin with Trial of Chicago 7, it just moves. Like, his scripts are typically lively, and the direction is lively as well. He adds life beyond what's on the page. And definitely not in House of Games. I don't think he breathes the life into it as a director, probably because of his, he'd probably kick my ass for saying this, but he doesn't have he can't instill the art into what he's doing. Everything's still matter of fact and still cold. Although then you get to something like State and Maine or Red Belt, which we'll also talk about. We all saw, as he grew or as he kept directing, I think Red Belt's probably, as far as the ones he directed, I think that one's my favorite because that one has that one feels like the movie's breathing. It feels like it has life to it and much less cold than House of Games is. And I keep trying not to say House of Cards, so if I say that, just assume that I said House of Games. So we'll just get that out of the way. But yeah, it's I definitely feel growth in him as a director throughout the years. But as a natural director, maybe not. He's better served as an actor. And unlike Aaron Sorkin, where with Molly's Game and Trial of Chicago 7, I got excited to see Aaron Sorkin direct his own scripts moving forward. With David Mamet, if he writes a script and he directs it, I'm there opening day. I'm going to watch it. But I might be more excited if, say, someone like Brian De Palma or David Fincher were to direct a David Mamet script.
Fair enough. Bruce, is there something to be said, Eric was saying, about matter-of-fact approach to directing, even though Eric adds on that his visual language has improved over the years? Is there a plus to saying that sometimes, with Mamet, sometimes he can be when it comes to directing, it's a matter-of-fact style. Is there something that could be said for it, or are you on that train where like maybe,
I think it would depend on the script. I think some scripts would lend themselves to that, but if he might default to that kind of as his default setting, whereas I kind of see what Eric is saying in that almost like it's almost like a piece of like a song or a piece of music. Like the writer writes the piece of music or the song, but you're really interested in seeing how different people interpret it. And I think a more stylistic visionary director with some of the scripts might do something really interesting, and you get that kind of you get a really interesting juxtaposition of the two kind of styles meshing, which I think could be very exciting.
Yeah.
And I think might be a little more exciting in some of these stories than possibly what Mamet brings as a director. Although it'd be interesting when we talk about these, we should kind of get into the two movies, because I kind of feel like he's sort of more stylish in House of Games for my eye than he is in Red Belt. But that's my take.
I love that. Okay, well, let's get into it. First off, we are spotlighting House of Games. These are choices by Eric Mamet. House of Games, 1987, and Red Belt. I forgot what year. I think that's a 2008 release. We'll get to Red Belt in a little. Okay, Red Belt 2008. But first, House of Games, 1987. And here's the main plot synopsis. A psychiatrist comes to the aid of a compulsive gambler and is led by a smooth-talking grifter into the shadowy but compelling world of stings, scams, and con men. Written and directed by David Mamet. Now, Lindsay Krause plays Margaret Ford. She is a psychiatrist at the time of the movie's release. She was married to David Mamet, so very close collaboration. Joe Montana is Mike, the grifter she meets along the way. Margaret Ford, we have to know, she's a psychiatrist who, when we're introduced to her, she is at the top of her game. She's a little bit too conceited for her own good and self-assured. She's signing her book, her just released book. People love her. Everything is good. So when she stumbles into this world of con men and grifters, she thinks she's able to handle them because she knows the mind of the human being, and she wants to delve deeper into the recesses of that mind, specifically into the mind and inner workings of Mike, again played by Joe Montana. The movie also features performances by J.T. Walsh, the late J.T. Walsh, who's always great. He plays this person named the Businessman. We miss J.T. Walsh so much. And also David Mamet, regular, and we miss Ricky J so much as well. He plays, quote, George. And I'm just going to say he plays George. So if you know anything about Ricky J and what he brings to the table as a sort of a person who's a lot of layers, a lot of sleight of hand stuff with Ricky Jay. I'm not just talking about the hands or card tricks or illusions. He's just a very masterful trickster type of an actor, and his voice is amazing. He's just amazing. So, yeah, Bruce Perky. Well, first of all, Eric Holmes, why did you pick House of Games? Was it because it's probably a signature Mamet release, or you just...
Well, there was a couple. The obvious reason is House of Games is the first movie he directed, and Red Belt is the last one. So it kind of similar to what I did with William Friedkin. It kind of inherently gives you a full arc of beginning and of what they've done. Granted, he's done TV movies before and so on and so forth, but
Yeah.
talking about like feature length movies. But yeah, it just seemed like a good good comparison of the two. Here's what he did first, here's where he was then, and here's where he is now. And also I think Red Belt, I don't think many people have seen House of Games, and Red Belt, I'm pretty sure a lot of people haven't seen that either.
Oh, yeah.
I love Red Belt. I've seen it a bunch, but I don't get the sense that either one of those two movies are, really well known.
Well, Eric, you just showed your cards. You played a bad hand right there because you're just talking to a
A
couple
whole
of
house of them.
old men.
It's a tell.
Bruce. I'm going to say he's an old man, and I'm an old man. We are around the same age.
Yeah.
We do remember House of Games very, very well because, you know what? To your point, Eric, it was not probably seen by the mass audience, but I remember House of Games. I don't know if you remember this, Bruce, but it was really so well loved and received. Siskel and Ebert reviewed. I remember Siskel and Ebert reviewing House of Games when it came out, and the fact that it had all of those things with the tricksters, the cons, the double cross, all of these twists and turns. It was a very popular film among the indie circuit. Now,
Yeah.
Bruce, I like what you were saying. You were saying this you felt was even more stylized than Red Belt, and you're I think you're assuming that you're saying more stylized, not even in the fact of the dialogue. You're talking about the way he set up the shots, or maybe the way it's edited. Yeah, talk to us about that.
I mean, I think that's maybe that's just because the nature of the story, because this is much more twisty and noiry. I mean, it's almost neo-noir in some ways, the way it kind of plays out, kind of the everyday person kind of going into this more of an underworld. But I mean, I think that the way there's some really obvious shots, like going up for the first time to the place, and there's the smoke coming out of the, the manhole covers and all that kind of neon, and the back door with the stuff written on it that says, House of Games or whatever it said on there, and all those kind of little touches. I think that's pretty stylized. It's more stylized than you might expect, I think. And I think that it kind of dates it, but in a good way. I think it kind of feels, there's definitely an 80s edge to it that kind of works there as well.
I mean, also assume that in 1987, this is the movie that the most characters ever smoked. There's like how many characters?
Oh my God, yeah. But and also to your point, if you were into indie movies or weird like movies, or you're kind of really into the cinema scene at the time, this was definitely on your radar. This is kind of like a few years later, if you were in the scene, everyone heard about Reservoir Dogs. You heard about it. Now, I agree. There's a lot of people probably who have never come across House of Games. And some of it I think will work and some of it won't work for them. And we can kind of talk about what might or might not in kind of the way it unfolds.
Well, I want to ask you, what do you think doesn't work? And Eric, do you agree with that? There's things about this 1987 film that won't work, but I'd like to hear what you think doesn't work first, Bruce, about this.
I think the hardest thing for people is going to be some of the, so here's what I think. What crackles in this movie consistently is every time there's some sort of a con going on, and which is a good chunk of the movie, right? Those scenes are fantastic no matter what. But the scenes, especially early on, some of the psychiatrist scenes and some of the scenes with her are pretty, to me, they're a little bit talky and stagey and they don't seem very naturalistic. And I could see people kind of going like, what is this movie? You know? And then once you get into the bar and she gets drawn into the card room, you're off to the races. I think you're good to go.
Yeah, it's a straight noir for me. I loved everything about this movie, and it's extremely stylized,
Mm-hmm.
and it's hard to, it's like reading a short story from Ernest Hemingway. The dialogue seems so simple when you read a Hemingway story, but go try to write a short story on the same level of Ernest Hemingway. The same thing with Mamet speak in House of Games. You go, wow, the way they talk, so clipped,
Yeah.
just like this
Yeah.
over there. Who are you? I don't know. But the way Mamet does it is so effective and stylized, and strictly Mamet. I loved everything about this movie. Eric, did you see anything that maybe a lot of people may jump off of, may not appeal to as far as this film? Or do you think
Uh,
it's an all? Yeah.
One thing that sticks out for me, and actually, Red Belt has this too. Actually, a lot of his movies do. There's certain bits of dialogue that he writes that I know when he writes it, it makes sense, but it doesn't always come out right when the actors are doing it. They'll repeat themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Greg, I'm repeating myself. And like, if you understand, if you can read it on the page and you can understand the flow of what he's going for, it'll sound great. But a lot of times, I don't think the actors really perform certain bits of dialogue the way they're supposed to. And I guess that's what I mean by cold. Not so much that it's not stylized, but it's just cold. They said the words. That's the words that were on the page, and they said it, and now we're going to move on. Whereas I think if say you got a Stuart Gordon with Edmund, I didn't really notice that problem. I noticed a little bit of it in Glenn Ross. The line, "Make your decision for Christ." Alec Baldwin's great, but that line comes off a little weird. Probably because that would probably be a good example of where I think Alec Baldwin could use a line reading there, because I don't think he understood the cadence in which he wrote that.
Sure.
And so it just sounds weird. But like Stuart Gordon's when he did Edmund, that's a good example, because Edmund and House of Games has a lot in common as far as setting and tone. But where House of Games is a really good story, really good dialogue, really good twists and turns. But Edmund has just as good, story, just as good dialogue, but there's more moments in there that I can grasp onto and remember, as opposed to House of Games. The stuff I remember in House of Games is not so much the style or what sings about the movie. It's more of the dialogue going back and forth, like when they're at the poker table or so on and so forth.
Agreed.
Let me suggest this real quick. What I think would be interesting, and this is rewriting it a little bit, but so we're talking about how it's so noir-y and kind of that dialogue and the situations and everything, but she doesn't start out in that world. You know what I mean? Like, it's not like a Dashiell Hammett story where the femme fatale walks in and she's like, hey, she's already in that world. She's out of that world. So I almost wish we could have seen her performance and her writing differentiated from that a little bit. Like, have her be super naturalistic and super different from that, so that as she gets into that world, it contrasts, and then you see her, because it's her story in a lot of ways, right? I mean, that's the point of this movie, is what happens and how her character evolves. And to see her get to the point she gets to at the end, obviously we're not going to spoil it, you could see her dialogue and her way of talking change with that. That would have been really interesting, as opposed to just kind of being the same all the way through.
Yeah.
It's so funny about you said that, Bruce. Okay, going back to the podcast, I think that's a really interesting take on that story. And you mentioned Dashiell Hammett. It's funny. Probably, I'm thinking what Mamet would say to you to that, if you actually had a drink with him and talked to him about that.
So you write your own, buddy.
yeah. You probably show the Pulitzer, a little picture of his Pulitzer.
Yeah, I'm sure. He'd have a point there, but
you know what? In the podcast, he mentioned the writer who was the podcast host who's gushing over him. He goes, "What kind of writers did you love? Yeah, you must have loved Hammett." And he said, "I tried reading Hammett never got into him. I was more of a Raymond Chandler guy. So
Yeah.
so I was right on that train with you with Hammett, by the way, is very hard to read, but very good pull on that. So I wanted to use that as well. Yeah, I you know what? I really love this. I felt this movie had a lot of style to it. I will say this though. I know you guys were waiting for me to mention The Untouchables. And okay, thank you for letting me mention.
I won.
Yeah, okay.
We should have a drinking game. Oh, that should be next time. Anytime he mentions anything to do with De Palma, we got to drink.
Oh, I love that game.
Okay, so you know what? It's not a
And
complaint.
he has to swear.
Oh, I have to swear. Okay. Yeah. Okay. We will make those rules next time about how many my penance and my punishment for mentioning De Palma. But something like Untouchables, where you have De Palma working on Mamet's script, or like you were saying, Stuart Gordon with Edmund.
Mm-hmm.
I as much as I love this movie, I'm thinking House of Games what would this movie look like if it was early David Fincher pre The Game?
Yeah.
But it's still not a discredit to David Mamet. It's just the fact that, going back to Eric's thesis or approach, that David Mamet has a matter-of-fact way of directing. I don't think, to me, that's not harmful or harmless. It's just telling the story. In that manner of speaking, I don't mind it. I think that version of Mamet, when it's just shoot the shot and as competently as possible, it really works on a movie like Spartan. The movie is called Spartan, okay? So it has to have a very terse and concise way of looking at things. And I was watching Spartan a little bit the other day, just clips of it, and I go, wow, this is a really cool David Mamet film. I think ultimately, as a director, I think it's a discredit to me as a viewer that I don't consider him as more of a filmmaker. I think I really need to, from these two movies, I really need to dive deeper into his directing work. But I also think it's a credit to him as a writer that you go, well, it's just, you go, oh, well, it's kind of like Paul Schrader, but Paul Schrader is a little bit more elevated as a filmmaker. You go, well, it's a David Mamet directed movie, but it's a Mamet screenplay. So we're just really focused on the script. And just I think we're just saying, oh, let's just hope he shoots it competently. And I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I think it's just because he's such a genius, we overlook him as a director. At least I do. So
I might also add that, and we've talked about the movie Tesla. That would be an example of way too much style that doesn't serve the movie at all. In fact, there's so much style that's to its detriment. And
great point.
So I guess if you took something like House of Games and made it overly, like you get on the same level as Tesla, you would start getting diminishing returns the more out there you got. And so in that aspect, the more subdued, just say what's on the page, point the camera in the direction, say what's on the page, you're not gonna fuck it up. If the script's good and you're doing just the workmanship of it, you're not gonna fuck it up. But I do think there's kind of like a happy medium in there somewhere.
Yeah, like I would say, like, for example, he has a shot in there that's really cool that he could do a little more of, and it wouldn't be like crazy to do a few of these kind of things. But he has that shot where he kind of pans across with her as she walks through the bar.
Yeah,
and it's not like super crazy, but it's stylish, and it shows you the setting. It shows her walking through the setting, and you see the people playing pool, and you see the guy stand up against the bar, you see the little room to the side, and then you see him come out and stand at the door. That's perfectly works with the tone and the feel of what this movie is going for. And I think that kind of stuff, I feel, is pretty stylish and pretty interesting filmmaking. And that's the kind of thing I think you could see a little teeny bit more of in some of the scenes. Now, when it's the con man scenes, you keep them pretty snappy and pretty straightforward because your focus is so much on the action of what is occurring in those scenes. Yeah, you don't want to go crazy on those. It would be way too much.
I mean, you know what? The story itself for House of Games is excellent. I think I would definitely give House of Games a high recommend for people if you're a fan of David Mamet's work as a writer and as a director. It's competently directed, well acted, obviously by Joe Mantegna and Lindsay Krause and the ensemble. Eric Holmes, is House of Games, upon your rewatch, is this a high recommend for you as well?
Oh, they all are. Yeah.
They all are.
Even like it, as much as the thesis seems to be anti-Mamet, which, let's get this clear, it's not. I love him and I love all his movies. But yeah, they're all high recommends. This is kind of, I don't know. The whole thing's kind of a nitpick. We know he's great.
Right.
We know he's a wonderful writer. This is kind of like this is a 9 out of 10. What could happen to make it a 10 out of 10? That's kind of the thing
or we're
I'm
just
about.
And we're also just talking about how would it change, or would it be interesting to see other directors attack it too? That's just kind of a different, like I said, different interpretations of a piece of music. It's still good music, but how does this play it?
Yeah.
Did you guys read any of the weird trivia? I was going to bring them up before we leave. A couple of trivia pieces I thought was really interesting. One was, this is one of the, I just noticed it as I was watching it this time. I think it's the third time I've seen it. I had never caught to me that it was in Seattle, and I lived in Seattle during the time this was made. I didn't even know it was made there until I saw it this time. And I was literally watching the movie going like, oh my God, that looks a lot like areas I'd been in Seattle. And then as I was watching it more and more, it was. And it's so funny because so many movies are supposed to be in Seattle and don't film in Seattle. Do they ever mention that it was in Seattle in this movie?
Never. I don't recall.
And it has so many real Seattle locations. It's incredible. So it's more real locations in Seattle than I've seen any other movie. And all the other Seattle movies are all shot in, Vancouver with like the Space Needle in one shot or something. So I thought that was kind of funny. Another thing I read that was really interesting. So Ricky Jay obviously knows a lot of these cons. And in this one thing I read, it said that David Mamet asked him to demonstrate the con. And specifically, there's a con with an envelope that we see on a street, and he's demonstrating something. And Ricky Jay said, well, I still know people who run these cons. I cannot show you the con for real, because if I did, this is their livelihood. So he made up that con that we see. So that is a different, like a variation on probably a real con, but that's his version of the con that you
amazing.
See with that envelope on the street. And the little subtext they did in the little trivia I read was that after the movie, some people tried to do that con and got caught because it didn't work as well. So I thought that was super interesting. So if you watch this movie, look for the envelope con, and you'll know that was made up by Ricky Jay for the movie. So
yeah, that's pretty cool. But I don't know how I feel about that. I guess if you're gonna fall for it, then you get what you got coming to you. But at the same time, here's how to spot a rapist. Well, no, don't tell them that, because there's people that make their livelihood on that. It's like, if it wasn't someone taking advantage of someone.
But doesn't that kind of jibe with Ricky Jay? You always feel like he's kind of 1 foot in the world too, So you're not.
And I can't be too mad, because I do love Ricky Jay. Rest in peace. I meant to mention this earlier, but Greg mentioned his amazing voice. Like, people talk about Morgan Freeman, as they should. Morgan Freeman's got a wonderful voice, but Ricky Jay is such a wonderful talker. He's got a great voice, and his patter when he does. Actually, David Mamet directed this. Ricky Jay and his 52 assistants, his magic show.
Oh.
I'm not even watching his hands do the magic trick. I'm just staring at him, going, and then what happened? Like, just listening to his pattern and his talking is just mesmerizing.
One of the great storytellers. Love that guy. Yeah. Well,
but I also wanted to bring up a scene. This is from State and Maine. We haven't talked much about Red Belt, and I'm bringing up State and Maine. But there's a great part in that where Alec Baldwin is drunk driving, and he flips the car over. And the camera's just right there. It's got it's Philip Seymour Hoffman, and I can't remember who else, just standing there, and they're just watching this. And then Alec Baldwin comes out of the red car and just walks up, looks at them, looks back, and go, so that happened. And they just
I remember that. That's a great scene.
That's a great example of this is exactly what the scene needs. No fluff, no show. It's just put the camera there. It's all on the page, and that I could not see that scene working any better than it did.
Yes, State in Maine. I remember actually doing that press junket. I gotta see that movie once again. Before we get into Red Belt, I just wanted to make a recommendation. Okay, and I haven't read it yet, but during this podcast I was listening to about Mamet and his own influences as a writer coming up in Chicago. Okay, obviously he was born in Chicago, Illinois. He's a Chicagoan, even though he lives now in LA with his wife Rebecca Pigeon. He was one of the many writers he recommended. And one of the writers I'm reading now, Ben Hecht, screenwriter Ben Hecht, he came out with a book. He was talking about this book called, Mamet was 1001 Afternoons in Chicago, written by Ben Hecht. And it's a compilation of more than 60 columns written for the Chicago Daily News during Hecht's run as a journalist before he became a award-winning screenwriter. So I don't know if I haven't read the book yet, but that's what Mamet is recommending. I actually went to my my library online and I borrowed another book from Ben Hecht, and it's really crisp writing. And I can imagine a younger Mamet reading a lot of those Chicago beat writers from the early 1920s, 1930s, and just honing that craft from that journalism space, and then how that actually influences him as a playwright and as a screenwriter as well, and how it carried him on throughout his life. So, and what's interesting about Ben Hecht, I was reading that short story, is not only was he a great journalist, I mean, he has a story, and he's the only story I read from Ben Hecht was how when he was a journalist working, I think it's Chicago Tribune, one of the Chicago papers, he wanted to and this is I guess it's an autobiographical short story. He's talking about how he wanted to reform a prostitute that he was really in love with. So he has her live with him. He has her live with him for a while, and they can't make the rent. They live in a small little place in Chicago, overlooks the river. And I think this is like maybe somewhere before the 1920s. And he's talking about her in vivid, sensual detail around that time, and but he also called her an angel. But ultimately the story goes on and says, well, they couldn't make ends meet. So he actually had his girlfriend, former prostitute, pretend she was actually a writer, and she ended up working at the same paper as he did as a journalist. And what Ben Hecht did, this guy was such an amazing writer, and it speaks to David Mamet's prolific nature. Ben Hecht actually doubled his article output and pretended she was the writer. So she had bylines, he had bylines, and they still couldn't make ends meet. Ultimately the story ends with he ends up taking a night job, and during the span of him leaving her in the apartment, she ends up in the newspaper office canoodling with a whole bunch of other journalists. So, but it's told in the Hechtian style, not in the Greg Srzavosty style. So it's a lot more interesting. So imagine if you're a fan of David Mamet's films, if you want to learn how to become a writer, Eric Holmes was saying, start listening to Mamet, maybe reading a lot of his books. But if you also want to go a little bit before Mamet and see what got him going, look up Ben Hecht, Hecht. The book that Mamet recommends is 1001 Afternoons in Chicago. Okay, now we are on to Red Belt. I love House of Games. I saw Red Belt when it was released. I did the press junket. I was a little bit mixed when I saw that movie back in 2008. I enjoyed it, but then at the end of the movie, I said, this movie to me it's about the MMA and jiu-jitsu, and Mamet is so passionate about jiu-jitsu, and I'm assuming MMA. I was a little bit mixed and I goes, it's good. It's a good movie, but I was expecting more in 2008. I saw it again the other night, and I was blown away at how much I absolutely fell in love with Red Belt. I am going to track this down on Blu-ray, and I'm going to buy it. I really, really love Red Belt. Eric Holmes, you were saying this is a tail end of Mamet as a director for cinema. He's done cable stuff since then. What you've seen it a lot of times. Why have you seen it a lot of? Do you love this so much? You were saying it's his best output as a director. That's a lot to say.
Yeah, probably. It's definitely my favorite of his. And well, first of all, this was the first movie that introduced me to Chiwetel Ejiofor, and I still probably butchered his name. But
Chiwetel Ejiofor. Chiwetel Ejiofor.
Chiwetel Ejiofor. This was the first time, probably not the first time I seen him, but the first time I noticed him. And I watched it and I go, I fucking love that guy. And it's been a wonderful romance ever since. I love the idea of this is, and to bring up Edmund again, this is the antithesis of Edmund. Edmund thinks the world owes him something, and he's waiting for the world to pay him back. Do what he thinks is right. Chiwetel Ejiofor is constantly not getting shit on, but he has very strict code of conduct, and he lives that even to his own detriment. And I think that's what makes him a good protagonist to root for, because you want him to succeed because he deserves to. But things don't always quite work out the way. And look, he could balk on his own morality, even just a little bit, and no one would judge him for it. But even that little bit is just too much for him. He's not going to do it. And then, well, I don't know if we want to spoil it, but he gets the last scene really touched me.
Yeah.
Here you go.
Because here you go.
The movie earned, not only does the movie earn it, but the character earns it. He, it just holds your pants up, but it's not about the thing. It's what the thing means. And that movie just really touched me. And it even goes all the way back right from the beginning when they're doing the sparring, and he's like, improve the position, and that's kind of the driving force of the whole movie. Is just improve the position, and he tries, he can't quite get it. He's getting his ass kicked. Improve the position, and he's not improving his position in life. He's improving his morality, and eventually that pays off for him, even though he gets his ass kicked pretty much throughout.
Okay. Kind of spoiler alert towards the end, but it's not, I'm kidding. It's not really a spoiler alert, but before we get to you, Bruce, quick plot synopsis. Chiwetel Ejiofor plays mixed martial arts instructor Mike Terry. He runs that school with his wife, played by Alice Braga. I like to call her, because of Alice Guy Blaché, I'm just going to call her Alice Braga because she's very good as Sandra Terry, the wife of Mike Terry. The thing with Mike Terry is he's a warrior. He has, like Eric Holmes says, a code of conduct. Sandra Terry, his wife, she understands, I'm sure she understands his warrior code mentality. She married him. She's in love with him, but she comes from a Brazilian family that they are steeped into the world of jiu-jitsu and MMA, and they have a family steeped in that history, but they're also a business kind of family as well. They want to actually monetize MMA and fighting and everything, and that makes sense. Mamet actually shows us two ways to go about living. It's through as seen through the MMA. Sometimes it's a business, but will you decide, is it about money, or is it actually about keeping your moral code, or can you actually mix the two? Also in the movie is Emily Mortimer. She plays an attorney, Laura Black. I'm not going to really spoil it, through a gunshot and maybe a broken window, she enters the life of Mike Terry and Mike Terry's best friend, Joe Collins. Joe Collins is a police officer played by Max Martini, and Max Martini's fantastic in this movie, by the way. Upon a rewatch, I forgot how good he was in Red Belt. He plays Joe Collins, the best friend of Mike Terry, and also Mike Terry's student. What I completely forgot, when I saw Red Belt, I was looking for the Mamet speak, and I was looking for a lot of MMA action, and I was looking for some awesomeness from Tim Allen, who plays an entitled actor, who comes in the crosshairs of Mike Terry, and who's actually the benefit of Mike Terry's Good Samaritan / warrior actions. I was expecting a little bit more action when I saw it in 2008. Now 2020, I, like Eric, was really moved at all the layers that was explored in Red Belt. I just think this is a master stroke from David Mamet. Bruce, what do you think of Red Belt? Did it hit you differently? Because this is the first time you've seen it.
This is the first time I've seen it. Yep, I've never seen this movie before. I am probably in a mixed bag on this one. I think that for me, I have some big problems with the plot. There's some, it's really impossible to talk about without spoiling things, so I can't really do it. There's some massive coincidences that occur. And maybe I'm just not quite getting it all, because I feel like there's some of it is machinations that is being done on purpose to a character in this movie. But some of it I also was like, well, he met that person in a bar, just happened to meet that person in a bar, so later on he could find out what that person was doing. Like there's things like that happen in this movie that really bugged me and pulled me out of it. And I would have followed it more in a movie like House of Games, where everyone is playing games the whole time. But here the idea is that some of the people aren't playing games and it's just chance. And then other places they are playing games. And then I was like, okay, well that I understood, because that person was playing games. There's a thing with a watch, which I loved. And I understand what was going on there. And where there's a confrontation about the watch, then somebody says, I'll be right back, and they don't come right back. Those kind of things were awesome, because I knew that stuff was going on and it was unfolding. But there's other scenes, like I said, where I was like, okay, that I have to buy a real level of chance there to buy into that. So this might be one of those where I have to get the second viewing to get that part. Now, all that being said, all the other stuff is I'm right on board with. So the opening scene is fantastic, where you're just how you set up what's his name again, Mike Terry's like his ethos and his training style and what he's going for, and kind of his whole philosophy, and seeing it with the guy that he's training, and how that guy is kind of like, is he ready for it yet, and kind of how he plays out in the story was really great. And I did have a little bit of a problem too with the wife. There's some things that happen with the wife that I felt was underwritten. Like I didn't understand fully some things that happens with her as it goes along. I didn't feel like it was quite earned. I feel like something happens with her later on, and like, oh, she did this. And I'm like, really? That kind of came out of nowhere. I thought that came too quickly, but like almost like there was a scene left out. But
interesting.
That's me.
What part are you talking about with that?
The wife makes a turn towards the end of the movie. Her attitude, I'll just say her attitude changes.
Okay. All right.
And to me, I didn't feel like we had gone to that point in this movie. But
I'll say without spoiling anything, it's in there.
Yeah.
I think I know what you're talking about, but it's in there.
And I will fully own that I might have missed some stuff too.
Yeah.
Like there was some twists and things that I saw, but there might have been some stuff that was set up that I didn't quite catch, that if I saw it again, I'd be like, oh, it's right there. Okay. I was just, I didn't get it. Because you've seen it 10 times or whatever. You probably know. So,
yeah. But
I will say this though.
Go ahead.
Okay. And I'm gonna just say the word shithouse, because I'm gonna mention Brian De Palma's name. By the way, Shithouse
in
is a very
2
good
episodes.
movie. Shithouse is a very good movie. But I am going to say something. This is a movie that would be perfect for Brian De Palma, to Bruce's point, because there's so many inciting events, balls juggling up in the air. There's so many subplots that can get confusing. And if they use someone like Brian De Palma for of those Brian De Palma shots
with
where
his
everything
split screens and stuff.
No, there's not split screens where 10 different things converge and come together, and it just those kind of moments. I think it would have made a really interesting movie, but I think this is one of those movies where I feel the insular approach and focused approach of David Mamet really worked for Red Belt. If they had someone like, I can't believe I'm saying this, like a De Palma or a Fincher or one of these A-list or talented director, this felt like it really came out of the bloodstream of David Mamet, just because it feels like he knew MMA. It feels like he knows the sacrifices that a guy like Mike Terry is going. Look, and obviously the movie is not just about MMA. It's about Mamet's own experiences in Hollywood, yeah, we get the symbolism. It's not so overwrought and obvious to make us go, oh, come on, man. It's subtle enough. Not subtle. It's out there, but I still bought it. I was still cool with it. Eric, your thoughts? Do you think this was a perfectly directed film from Mamet? This is like no one else could have directed it because it felt like a personal story as far as.
I don't know that no one else could have directed it, but I do think that this is probably, well, for me, it's between this and State and Maine. As far as his directed movies are probably his best directed movies, and especially this one because, like I've enjoyed every Mamet movie I've seen. I haven't seen all of them, but I've seen most of them, and this was the one. And we'll go back to that last shot. That's the only David Mamet movie, whether he just wrote it or written and directed, that hit me emotionally.
Mm-hmm.
Because I understood the journey that the character went on and what it means from that final shot. And it
Well, I can't think of another.
Might be one of the movies that might be one of the reasons why I like the movie so much.
I can't think of another Mamet movie that has, once again, not spoiling it, that has that final progression. Like the way that final scene progresses is a totally different type of ending than I can think of in anything that I've ever seen by Mamet. Once again, you've probably seen more Mamet than I have, but that's a type of ending I haven't really quite come across. Yeah, we have to be so vague. I actually want to ask you a bunch of questions now because it's stuff I'm not understanding. I'm like, what about Emily Mortimer character? I really want.
Yeah, I know. Guys, was I reading the movie wrong, Eric? When I was telling you I was really moved by the movie, I thought this was a movie was not about Mike Terry's journey as a warrior and as a person who had a certain code and a love for his fellow human being. I thought the movie was about his brother-in-law, Bruno Silva, and how his dreams were shattered because he really needed to make all that money for his family.
Yeah.
And that's all that they were trying to do. They were trying to market a great idea from their layabout brother who didn't want to make a lot of money. I just thought at the end, and he slowly sees that his brother-in-law walk away from him and just shattered his dreams and the dreams of his family at the expense of their master teacher, who probably could have used a Benz or a Rolls at his respective domicile as well, don't you think? This payola scam was the fact that it was shattered. Did I read the wrong? Did I read Red Belt?
No, that was it exactly. Actually, the weird thing is that this isn't so much like a character journey of Terry growing. He's already grown. He has his ethos and his morals. It's just now he's got to put it to the test. So it's not so much I'm learning to become this thing. He's already that thing, but now though, as he's being that thing, the world's testing him. It's like, you got your thing, let's test it. Let's put your feet to the fire and see if you can hold true to that. And he does. Spoiler alert, but he does.
It's kind of that classic hero's journey sort of a thing in some ways, if you think about it. I mean,
yeah,
he has
a little
to
bit.
kind of. Yeah,
I have a feeling
partway through maybe.
I have a feeling, going back to Possessor Uncut, I have a feeling if Eric and I were in a theater and we saw Possessor Uncut again, he and I would. We've said this. He and I would like it more, a little bit more. Okay. And I have a feeling, Bruce, you don't have time because we're doing a podcast and we have to watch new movies and churn out content. You know, keep on watching movies, but down the road, churn it out.
I'm churning out the content.
I just need to ask some questions to Eric because there's some things that are bugging me. I have a feeling that he knows the answers to these.
Very cool.
And there's
seen
some
it
things
several times.
Yeah, I need to ask him some stuff about Emily Mortimer's character, like how she encounters there. Like, I want to know. Okay, I'm not going to say anything. And yeah.
Spoilers, say it. Now I'm curious.
Okay, now Red Belt again is not streaming like House of Games. I don't think it's streaming anywhere. These are all rental movies. You know, I just rent it on iTunes or whatever service you rent. They're both worth renting. Again, I would say if you were personally, Bruce, let's go with you. Which out of the two are these both recommends as far as rentals, or
I would say this is a mild recommend, but I would say that I could be on the wrong end of the stick on this a little bit. I'm kind of in the middle level on this one. but I would say it's definitely recommend, because there's way more good than bothered me in this one. So I'm, you know what I mean? Like, I'm leaning that way. Whereas House of Games, I would fully recommend, with the only caveat being that some people get past that first 10 minutes or so where it's just her and get into the story, and then you'll be off to the races. But both are recommends.
Cool.
Go ahead.
Cool. And yeah, Red Belt to me is a high recommend. I actually would recommend it even more than House of Games. House of Games should have been a movie that should be right up my alley, being a fan of film noir, suspensors, twist-driven stuff. House of Games is A, and to me, Red Belt is A+++, because of that hero's journey. I completely missed the boat the first time I saw it in 2008. Bruce.
Let me suggest something. I think House of Games is a better first watch, because the twists affect you more.
Sure.
Whereas I think second and third watch, it may not catch you as much. So I think they're kind of flipped. I think you probably get more out of Red Belt as you go, because you kind of get past the twists and you can kind of get into the depths. Whereas House of Games is a lot about the twists. So once the twists are kind of there, you kind of miss a little bit. Maybe something there.
Yeah, good point. Good point. Eric, I guess with you, it's an obvious rent these movies or get these movies on physical media as possible, right, Eric?
Yeah, definitely. And I was also thinking of I guess this comes full circle. House of Games, from my perspective as a director, kind of cold. It's got its style, but it's kind of point the camera here, point the camera there. And for me, Red Belt was a lot more emotional. So maybe that's David Mamet taking his own advice. Just does House of Games and then does the next thing and the next thing and the next thing, and just keep working and keep working. And eventually he's going to go from here to here, because that's what happens with repetition.
Good point.
Maybe he just took his own advice, and through hard work and perseverance, he finally got good at a thing.
I mean, it takes a lot to really go for that vulnerable spot towards the end of the movie without giving too much away. Okay, that is our spotlight on David Mamet. Before we go, we gotta wrap up with you, Eric. Well, actually, before we wrap up with you, Eric, Bruce, final thoughts on Mr. David Mamet. Just in general thoughts. Anything come in your head right now?
I would say, like Eric said, definitely as far as like as a writer, if you're interested in writing at all, definitely delve very, very deep into Mamet, and especially in his ethic of how to write, and like, just freeing yourself up to write. But I would say, I feel like there's a lot of newer film watchers that maybe haven't delved especially into some of his directing work and delve deeper into his work. So I would say go back and look into some of it. There's some amazing stuff there. And he's always been really strangely relevant, I guess I would say. He's always writing about what is happening in the world, but he's doing it in a really interesting, dramatic way, and not a preachy way usually. He's kind of ahead of the game on that. So
and he doesn't pander. He's not a pander. Yeah,
he does it through the action. But if you look at him, you're like, oh, well, obviously there's stuff going on there that was happening at the time or happening now. So I think that there's a really interesting levels to be found with his work that people might kind of underestimate. So
yes, I continue to underestimate David Mamet. By the way, Eric, you've seen The Winslow Boy, correct? You have seen The Winslow Boy? No. Oh,
I haven't either.
You haven't either. Well, I'm not going to tell you guys to go see The Winslow Boy, because I haven't seen Uncle Peckerhead. I haven't seen Rosemary's Baby. I haven't seen Goonies. I haven't seen a whole bunch of Friday the 13th. So I'm not going to recommend you guys see The Winslow Boy. But The Winslow Boy is Eric, if you see The Winslow Boy, mind blown. I guarantee your mind will be. And Bruce, you're going to really appreciate The Winslow Boy as well. Streaming, I believe, right now on Amazon Prime Video. Last thing on David Mamet for me is, I'm so glad I was able to see both movies, especially Red Belt. I can't believe how good and underrated. And this is, look, Bruce, I don't think this is one movie that has not really been seen, because House of Games had its time in the sun. Red Belt maybe had its time in the sun for MMA enthusiasts, or maybe the select David Mamet enthusiasts. But now, 12 years later, it's still a relevant movie. It doesn't feel dated whatsoever. Excellent performances. And I
Mhm.
hate to say it, I blame Eric Holmes because of getting and researching David Mamet. I have started reading a lot more, and I think I'm gonna start reading more Ben Hecht. I'm gonna read. I might even read David Mamet's last novel, for 2018. It's called Chicago, a novel. I can't wait to start reading. You'd think with someone like Aaron Sorkin, with all that interesting dialogue, that would inspire me. I really love the yeoman's work of David Mamet, the fact that he's from Chicago and he's really interested in that era of writing the Chicago journalist. It just really latched on to me. So I think I'm going to be continuing to go into dive deeper into the world of David Mamet, Ben Hecht, and everything like that. So we're going to end last but definitely not least, Eric Mamet Holmes. Find your film. Final say on David Mamet.
Well, I will just give you advice that perhaps he would. If you want to do a thing, whether it's writing, painting, drawing, music, whatever, it's going to suck. Do your thing, finish it, and let it suck. And then from there, improve the position, improve the position, improve the position.
That's very, if you please watch Red Belt, you will understand that very resonant last speech from Eric Holmes, Eric Mamet. Unfortunately, as soon as he says improve the position, I've had that nightmare of every single woman telling me the same darn thing for the last 30 years of my life. And that's why I'm single and have no
Craig,
kids, folks.
improve the position. There's
Aloha,
always an
improve the
escape. Don't
position.
worry. There's always an escape. You know the escape.
Yeah. Unfortunately, what's the deleted scene is please leave the room. Please leave the room. Okay. So, anyways, no. But in all honesty, improve the position. Very important words from Red Belt. Bruce, do you have sort of an inkling of an idea who you might pick in 2 weeks? Don't mention the name, but are there names banding about your head? Oh,
I'm not going to say what it is.
okay. All
I might have to
right.
confer with Eric Mamet before I make a final decision.
It's
Okay.
Michael Bay. No go. No go.
Okay, in a couple of weeks, it'll be Bruce Perky's turn for the director's spotlight on Find Your Film. We have now finished our David Mamet stuff. This is a guy we're going to definitely, for our weekly recommendations, and maybe down the line, we're going to probably revisit the work of David Mamet. He's done so much.
I think the Winslow boy's going to pop up soon.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm telling you, it blows my mind. All right, guys, we will see you next week for Find Your Film. It is late in the evening, especially for my good buddies, Eric Mamet and Glenn Perky. They have to go. I have to go. And again, what are we supposed to improve, Eric?
The position and find the escape.
All right, guys, we'll see you next week.